Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast. I am delighted to have in our virtual studio today a returning guest, and I believe the first returning guest to the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horn. But that's not the story about the returning guest. The story is about welcoming again Ronda Robinson, retainmyteam.com. And Ronda and I met earlier based on her work on empathy and care, which I believe underlies everything that happens in her work and the work at retainmyteam.com. And we have an opportunity to explore that again today, what it means in terms of the quiet quitting that's going on, why retaining teams are important, and how we think about optimizing talent strategies in organizations and in teams. So welcome again, Rhonda. I'm so glad that you're here.
Mike, it's always a pleasure to rejoin you. I know we connect offline and through messages and supporting each other on LinkedIn, but there's nothing like dialoguing with Mike Horn. It's always fire.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad to hear that. That boosts and elevates my spirits. If you could, our audience consists of leaders and their coaches who are developing their authentic leadership, who are bringing solutions to some of the enduring issues in organizations. And you've spent a lot of time working in organizations and with leaders on developing legendary leaders, not just average leaders. And I thought we might explore that just as we begin today in the context of authentic leadership.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I've been in the talent development space in the corporate setting for over 20 years. And when you're in that kind of role, people tell you things that they don't tell other people. And so you get a real inside look as to what triggers people and how they're thinking about certain situations, what makes them happy, what makes them disengaged, likes, dislikes, etc. And that, in combination with being a very intense student of behavioral neuroscience for well over a decade, it bubbles up very clearly that the research says that having empathy and authenticity really sets apart legendary leaders from average ones, even in a high IQ talent pool. So it's that extra people-first orientation, along with know thyself and be thyself, that really can elevate someone above and beyond other leaders in an organization.
It seems that at one level, Rhonda, you'd be describing the concept of self-awareness in leadership and importance. Its importance. Is that right? Or
yeah. So I think there's a whole movement of everyone wanting to be their authentic selves at work. In the U.S., we have been conditioned from the industrial age that you do not bring your personal stuff to work. You leave it at the door when you clock in. And that's just not, it's not even realistic to think that we could do that. So we've tried and failed. because it always comes out. People are people and their stuff comes with them wherever they go. And so let's quit pretending. Let's just quit pretending.
And there
Let
is an
people be themselves.
It's interesting because there are growing coaching practices helping executives reconnect with their families. And interesting that it seems that they've been on the increase since more people are co-located with their significant others and family members.
Yeah, and there's some interesting, very interesting research that shows that unintentionally, the higher a person climbs in rank, the more detached they come from other people. It's not on purpose. It's not something that's in one of the MBA programs that teaches them to do it. It's just a phenomenon that happens. And so leaders need to be very purposeful about staying connected. It's not going to happen organically. There's something in your brain that as you become a higher and higher leader of the tribe, you become less and less connected to the people. So it takes effort and purpose to do that.
Let's talk about this one-of-a-kind blend that you offer on, which is behavioral neuroscience, how people work, and the tools that attract and retain employees. How did that all come to be for you? I mean, what was the catalyst behind that search and integration and synthesis?
Yeah. So part of it's just how my DNA is wired. I've always been complimented on ways that I take seemingly unrelated things and put them together, and it's kind of magic when it happens. And as I was observing different phenomenons in the workplace, I was seeing what was triggering people to be engaged or disengaged. I was hearing leaders asking for help, wanting to know, what do I do and how do I do it? But when it comes to things like connecting with people, giving and taking of autonomy, providing certainty in the workplace, giving a sense of fairness and equality, valuing and appreciating people in an equitable manner, those are some intangible kinds of things. People say, how do I do it? And so that's the bridging of the two things, is the behavioral neurosciences understanding what the triggers are so we know what to focus on. The performance management are tools to say, well, how do we bridge that gap and how can we measure it? And then we've added in some technology to do the heavy lifting. In fact, you don't have to change people's mindsets in order for them to behave in this new way. The tools prompted to do that. And as you're rewarded for those initiatives and those actions, it's a dopamine rush and you want to do it more.
I mean, that's what I've always believed, that it's better to start at the behavioral level and work up to the mindset level. Yet, the body achieves what the mind believes. Yeah. So it's how we think about these issues in tandem and knowing the paths to choose.
That's right. I kind of align it or use the analogy of when you're teaching a child to say please and thank you. It's very mechanical at first, but the process is, if you want something, say please, please. And it's very mechanical for the child. But when someone says to them, oh, what a polite child you are so nice, that feels good. That's that dopamine rush, and they're encouraged to do it again. And so the next time they do it, expecting that same response because it feels good. And then over time, it just becomes the habit. So that's part of the behavioral neuroscience too, is appealing toward those dopamine rushes, that thank you button that's in your own head, in order to form new mindsets and get people to want to do these things.
Yes. And how are you thinking about performance improvement today? I mean, what's changed in the last 2.5 years?
Well, a lot has changed in the last 2.5 years, but finally, because a lot of things hadn't changed for 1,000 of years. Mm-hmm. So thinking back, in terms of what we're hearing today, there's a lot of chatter about, well, people just want a cushy job. They just want to feel good at their job. Well, no, it's actually a compliment to the human race that we've evolved to this point, because I'll go back to the industrial age as a starting point. And before that, people worked to survive. If you know, the hierarchy of needs, you first is survival, food, water, air, shelter, right? So that's what we worked for initially. Once you do that, you get to satisfy some nice to haves. Well, that's what we saw, in the past couple of decades, is people wanting to get stuff. It's quality of life. It's getting luxury items, and it's feeding our entertainment souls. So we got to that point. Now what's next is the social needs. And that's where we are today. We have evolved to now where we can look to social needs, and that's a great thing. Work now becomes not as necessary. Yes, it's fundamentally necessary, but now we need that social stimulation to satisfy our hierarchy of needs. So that's how I look at that today, is it's our responsibility to meet those needs, because that's where we're at as a civilization.
Or it may be, I might relate it to thinking about Will Schutz and Phiro B relative to another needs theory, which is that our interpersonal needs to be included, to have control, to be affectionate. Those three needs, inclusion, control, and affection, drive so much of a needs hierarchy in terms of social satisfaction.
Oh, yeah. Bingo. You nailed it. And that's what
I didn't. That was someone else a long time ago.
But you brought it forward in our conversation,
right.
Mike.
Right.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And going back to, what we started to say about leaders, and the number one thing that they're being asked to do is to relate to their workforce, to relate to the people around them. And one of the biggest knocking on the doors from employees is being able to relate to each other. And relatability starts with authenticity. It's liking, you look like me, you sound like me, not in terms of like physical looks, but I can relate to you. I trust you. We can break bread together. We can feel like we're in the same room and can feel safe together, whether it's a virtual room or a real room. And so those are the kinds of things that we're looking for now. Why psychological safety is such a big topic today. Why building connections in a hybrid and remote work are such a big topic today.
And what I'm also curious about is how you accomplish your mission. Maybe it's not accomplished, but how you advance and progress your mission to infuse more humanity into the workplace. It's a noble ambition.
It's a noble ambition, but what our approach is, use tools to fix and address these pinch points that we've just been talking about, so that you have time and brain capacity to actually pay attention to the people.
So it's a real action-oriented approach.
Completely.
And in that same regard then, Rhonda, is it important? What are some of the important steps in talent retention or retaining your team? And how do you make some distinctions maybe just between retaining team members and talent retention?
Yeah. So there's two obvious components to this. One is turnover, but the other is retention of people's attention and engagement at work in the job that they're at. So there was a lot of focus on turnover with the Great Resignation and the Great Realignment. But that seems to be, I don't know if we're just getting numb to it now or tired of talking about it. But now with the perception or reality, it's debatable, about the looming recession, we're seeing layoffs and reorganizations. But you know what? We've had layoffs and reorganizations in prosperous times as well. So it's going to happen no matter the economic climate. So the focus right now is on every employee counts. when they're in your building, when they're in your Zoom room, when they're under your umbrella, every employee counts. And so
It's interesting. I'm thinking about it from an additional perspective, and that's from the perspective of managing or leading. And there are always people when you're a manager, when you're a leader, who have plus and minuses with you, and you have pluses and minuses with them. And yet, I've also experienced in some of my failures what happens when you lose a team. I mean, it's one thing to, have one or two team members who, you aren't as aligned with, perhaps, particularly as it's influenced by geography and other interpersonal dynamics. But I think I've also had experiences when I've lost teams, and it's very difficult to recover from those kinds of losses, I think, relative to career development or advancement in an organization.
Yes. That's actually how I got started branching out and starting Retain My Team. Is I love being in the startup space, but what happens is you get acquired and then there's reorg and reshuffling and people are dismissed and some people are retained. And while it goes well on paper, it's always a terrible experience for the people, whether you are retained or whether you are let go. It just feels bad. There's a better way.
Yes, and in one of the circumstances that I bring to mind, I've just described as a failure. In one of those cases, I hired someone to lead one particular team who was technically competent in that area, and I think because he had high EQ and good technical competence, he became the leader of that group, and it was a loss for me in terms of having that, a wider span of influence in that organization. So a good action on my part, still creating and leading to a loss, and I think a better outcome for the organization.
Yeah. One piece that I see missing in way too many organizations is a true talent strategy. You have a marketing strategy, you have an operations strategy, you have a manufacturing strategy, but we don't have a talent strategy. Talent strategy in most organizations just means job descriptions. We need these types of jobs to fulfill this type of effort. What a talent strategy includes is really looking at lining up who's on the team and how they're naturally wired in order to align with your business goals. So what do I mean by that? If you are in an early startup phase and you are building, you're innovating, you're creating, you need a team that's wired to do that. Yes, there's going to be some back office people who take care of some of the other things. But for your team that's creating the product, the thing, you need those innovative minds. Now you've created the thing, and now you need to go to market. Well, that entails different people wired differently. But instead, what you do is you tend to promote those innovative people into those roles to lead the next function because they deserve it. They've been here. They put in their time. But they're not wired to do the day-to-day where the rubber meets the road processes and that kind of thing. And they're dissatisfied and they're not good at it. And so that's what I mean by a talent strategy is you've got to have the right people in the right role aligned with the business goals in order to really maximize your productivity.
And what are the steps that a human resources or people and culture or other business leader take in order to begin to explore those topics with someone such as yourself and Retain My Team?
Yeah, it really starts with admitting that we as humans don't do a real good job of understanding how people are wired. We are good with experience and skills and knowledge assessments, but looking at behavior types and lining that up to what you need for the business goals. So that's the start is just, again, let's stop pretending. Let's just say we need tools to help us do that. So we start with the business strategy. team by team because each team has a different strategy and a different part to play in the organization. And once you see what your strategy is, you can either hire into that, pull people from other parts of the building to join the team, or you can realign to have a stronger team that matches your strategy.
It's great because it certainly drives innovation in organizations. Talent drives strategy. And I'm wondering, so many, having served as a human resources executive in a couple of global organizations, I'm always acutely aware, either as a leader of a human resources function or as a person responsible for talent acquisition, that there is a budget that goes along with all of this. And often what I've experienced is that when the revenue goals aren't being met or there are new measures of financial effectiveness that are put into place, sometimes these processes to release funding for talent become very difficult. And depending on what you believe about where the U.S. economy is headed, it could spell more for reductions in force.
Mm-hmm. So the budget, people always make assumptions about budget. And when you think about these intangibles, the automatic default is this is going to be really expensive. And they think that because usually they bring in other humans to look at it in a human way. And it takes a long time and it's a lot of effort, heavy lifting. If you use the right tools, you can actually do this for the price of one or two mishires, which you've already done. And as you think about the additional productivity that you can get from the people that you have in the room, it exponentially pays for itself. You're already spending that money. It's just going down the drain right now. Take that money, reallocate it into aligning a business strategy with your talent strategy, get the right people doing the right jobs, and watch your productivity soar.
And then what you can do is accelerate the path to value. I assume that's the...
Yes, exactly.
And one of the ways that you begin to measure this, I'm sure you have like several outcomes that are unique probably to every client situation. Is that right? I mean, or are measures selected from a menu?
So we start with where they're at because each company has different pinch points and different immediate needs. So do we need to plug the hole of turnover? Then that's where we start. And that's easy to measure, right? And it's easy to quantify in terms of dollars and cents. Is it a reorganization? And one opportunity as well is in a reorg or in a downsizing or even a high growth mode. DE&I is such a hot topic right now. If you add in this behavior assessment, you give a whole nother layer of how to select people, which creates more fairness. It brings forward some people who may have been overlooked. Simple example, introverts versus extroverts. The ones that raise their hand usually get the deal. But if you have these behavioral assessments at your fingertips, you can pull forward some of the introverts who have amazing skills. They just don't have the horn that they've been tooting, maybe like the extroverts do.
And who would normally contact you from an organization, and what size does the organization need to be?
The old adage, the size really doesn't matter because, again, every person counts, every employee counts. Probably the smaller the company you are, the more profoundly every person counts. But the larger the company you are, the greater impact you have when every employee isn't firing on all cylinders. It exponentially has greater impact. So department heads are usually the ones that we work with because pinch points come from many different angles. I do find, though, that COOs and CEOs, because they have line of sight on the business strategy and they hear about people issues, are usually the ones that are first to raise their hands, sometimes human resources as well. Every business problem is a people problem. And it's the people problems that keep leaders up at night, but they don't have anywhere to delegate the people problems. HR can only do so much, and it shouldn't fall on their shoulders. But with Retain My Team, we try to be that group that you can delegate your people problems to.
And as you think about this delegation of people problems, what I think you really define those or describe those differently, but what would they be?
One of the most common things that we have leaders come to us and say, because they can't really articulate it, is, I'm just not getting enough out of my team. It's palpable. I can feel that they're not all there. They're not quite engaged. And in fact, Gallup says that 66% of the US workforce is not engaged right now, with about 20% of those being actively disengaged. So it's a real palpable problem, but they don't know how to explain it other than that. So we start with the right people in the right role. We do some inspiring things to make sure that for each person, you have your own pocket coach to appeal to the individual's style, the individual's needs, without putting extra work and burden onto the leader. Again, let the tools do the work so you can pay attention to the people. So
I'm sorry.
So I was just going to say, so if you've got the right people in the right role and you inspire them, once they're in that right role, amazing things happen.
How do we get to hire more of our first choice candidates? It's always devastating when you lose someone that you've searched maybe for months, maybe longer, particularly when you're looking at people with domain expertise or scientific talent, all of which you're very familiar with. As I, reflect on episodes in my career where I led human resources in biotech or in biopharma, or was instrumental in talent development systems. Clearly, you're focused on often, a very narrow niche of talent.
Right. There's a gold rush on talent and a war for talent right now. And most people are fighting that war on salary and benefits and perks. We earlier in the conversation talked about that's not where we are as a civilization.
No.
Those needs are going to be met, right? So what we do is, by understanding how the person is wired, you can fine-tune your job description to say those more descriptive words. We're looking for a creative individual who loves variety, who's going to get to try new things. Oh, that's me. Well, you've already decided that's the kind of person that you want. Put it in your job description. Now they're really interested and they're looking at your job posting versus the other mundane ones that are out there. Now that you are at the table, you both know what you're looking for and you're already that kind of person. So the interview goes more wildly successful. By understanding the right person for the right role, the interview team is now more aligned on what you're looking for. So it goes faster. There's less debate, and that's where you lose people. That time.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
It's wonderful to be descriptive about the role.
Yes. Be descriptive about the role. Be descriptive about what you want. Like for me, I'm a high autonomy. I need my autonomy. Oh, surprise. I ended up running my own business. So, but I can have that candid conversation because that comes out in the interview guide. It comes out in the interview process. It comes out in the behavioral assessment. We can be frank about that. Now we just talk about the degree of autonomy and what situation. You never talk about those in an interview.
Right. And what's so important is that all these upfront actions that you can engage in, that a client can engage in, ultimately reduces that new hire turnover rate, which is so important given the investment that's been made.
It does, because both parties feel greater certainty that this is a good fit. The candidate comes in with both feet in the door, not 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out, wondering if they really made the right decision. And it builds this competitive immunity to counter offers, whether it's from their old employer or from other places that they're interviewing, because people interview in parallel with multiple companies to see if they get the great offer. But if they find a home, research shows that it takes upwards of 20% more compensation to lure someone away if they really feel connected and that they feel like they're in the right place.
As a human resources executive, it was always challenging when someone you conducted a long search for didn't work out, and it was evident to everyone in the first 6 months of hire. It's disruptive for everyone. It's been disruptive for the individual, for their family, their close connections. And yet, I think at times we don't make decisions fast enough to end the pain, and we go through endless iterations of work that perhaps don't amount to much in terms of outcome. And that's what I love about the work that you're doing relative to talent strategy, is that you're helping to reduce these errors up front, or thinking about them in that way.
That's absolutely right. And, it goes back to know thyself. It also helps you to have candid conversations about where people are at. It works internally as well. If someone wants to move into a different role, you can see if it's a good fit. Now, it doesn't mean that you rule in or rule out just on the behavior assessment. It's a data point to inform the decision, but at least you know the degree of misfit that you are going to be walking into, because it's going to take more work on both parties to make it work, and it's doable. It's just going to take more.
How skilled do you think many managers are at doing this? Because from what I've read, I mean, the dissatisfaction among managers is also high. We tend to lay a lot at their shoulders, and yet maybe dissatisfaction is just as rampant, as what you cite with the earlier Gallup statistics, around 70% of the workforce disengaged.
Yeah. There are some managers that really do have this intuition. They're gifted at determining if someone would be a good fit for the role. But unfortunately, a lot of it's out of their control. As you see reorganizations and whatnot happening, like you said, you are sometimes given a team, or someone is put on your team that you never hired, you never would hire. I just talked to a ex-colleague of mine this last week who inherited a woman who has been passed around the organization. I know this woman that she's talking about. She's smart. She's gifted. If you give her, a list of things to do, she'll run through a wall and execute flawlessly. But she's been put into a role that requires strategic thinking and problem solving, and that's just not her gift. And so now she's getting a bad name. This manager doesn't have a way to really move her out. How do you have that candid conversation? You're not a strategic thinker or a problem solver. Well, you hired me for this job. Somebody hired me for this job. I was okay then. I'm not okay now. So it's real problem. And it's the burden that's falling on these managers to, quote, manage it. They're just surviving it. That's basically all they're doing.
Yes, so much of that goes on in organizational life, and it's disruptive. It's a time waste. I'm reminded, love what you do. And another thing about having fun at this thing called work, right? We have to stop thinking about people as human resources, and more as people, not as human capital or assets to be managed, but rather there to support the creative endeavors of the organization, which ultimately lead to innovation and growth.
Imagine all of this in your head time that people are spending festering about these problems, talking it out about these situations, how that energy can be channeled into having fun, into taking care of yourself, into getting work done.
I used to work for one consulting firm that I used to work for, Alexander Proudfoot consulting firm. They guaranteed it that at the time that I was associated with them, a 3-to-1 return on client's investment. And essentially it was done through productivity improvements or headcount reduction. So you figured out ways in order to improve processes, which would result in elimination of work or in other parlance, lost time that was present in the organization. You talk about a 200% money back guarantee on investment. What does that mean? How help me understand that?
Yeah, so we set up the metrics initially, but like I just mentioned earlier in the call, it's so easy to meet these metrics if you are having turnover and you do right by the people that you're bringing into the organization. It's easy to measure before and after. And when you do the right things, people stay. And when you look at productivity, when you finally get the right people in the right role and you give managers the tools to inspire each individual to be their best at work, you can measure productivity. It's easy, one versus the other. And again, the investment is so low cost. When you look at this, it's so easy for us to offer a 200% guarantee on your investment. It's easy.
It's so great to have your wisdom and your experience and your competence in advancing this important work in talent and optimizing talent. It's critical to every organizational endeavor and to help all of us to fulfill our aspirations and our purpose and have a work life that is filled with dignity. And I'm so grateful then, Rhonda, that you and your colleagues, Ronda Robinson, and your colleagues at retainmyteam.com are doing this work. Now, I'm sure that many of our listeners, many of the folks within our audience who are leaders and coaches, helping each other to develop and grow their authentic leadership journeys, would be very interested in the work that you're doing because it resonates with the idea about valuing the individual. And what better way to do that, but perhaps through a systemized approach that helps you look at talent and bring the best to every situation that you have. How would people get in touch with you, Rhonda?
Sure. So the easiest way is retainmyteam.com. All of our contact information and so forth is there. But I love making new connections on LinkedIn at Ronda Robinson. Follow Ronda Robinson on Facebook. We have a new YouTube channel, Retain My Team with Ronda Robinson. So if you look for any combination of those words, you're going to find me. Retain My Team, Ronda Robinson.
Oh, that's great. And we'll have all of this in the show notes for everyone as well. And Rhonda, as we really begin to wind down the year, as we're well into the second half, what strategies and recommendations would you have to the clients you serve, to the communities with which you work, relative to activities they ought to consider in the year end?
At this time of year, people are starting to look ahead to 2023. They're relooking at their marketing strategy, their business strategy, their operations and manufacturing, their budgets. And so now is the time to add a swim lane for talent strategy in there. There's never been a more important time in the US workforce and the global workforce to actually pay more attention, be more purposeful about how you are managing and addressing the people who do the work.
Such great advice and guidance, Ronda Robinson. As Rhonda said, put any of these words in combination, and you will be likely to find her. Ronda Robinson, Retain My Team, or for me, it's just easier to say retainmyteam.com. Rhonda, again, thank you so much. I learn so much every time I speak with you, every time we're in conversation relative to advances and in talent optimization. And I'm so grateful for all the work that you're doing that helps people to build powerful organizations. Thank you, Ronda Robinson, retainmyteam.com. Until the next episode of the Authentic Change Podcast with Mike Horn, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change Podcast.